Well, good morning. Like Barry said, my name is Brennan. I am Lainey Newton's fiance. She's in the back grinning. Most of you know Lainey, and if you just want to refer to me as Lainey's fiance, I'm actually okay with that. Plenty of people at school, even though she's graduated now, I'm still just Lainey's fiance. But that's a title that I take a lot of pride in. I'm just now looking out, and I'm seeing all of you, and I'm seeing so many eyes and so many smiles and so many faces that have been really good to me over the past few weeks, past few months, past couple of years since I've become somewhat of a part of this community. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful for that. It's not something that goes unnoticed. It's not something that I take lightly. So I wanted to take just a moment this morning to acknowledge that. So thank you, and I think for all of those reasons, this space, this time, and this moment becomes a little bit more special. Okay. To begin the morning together, I want to take a quick survey. I'm going to ask for some participation. So we're going to do a show of hands. Just really quick, does anyone still get the newspaper delivered to your house? I saw one hand, a hesitant hand in the front. No shame. I don't know many people who still get the newspaper delivered. I didn't expect to see too many hands shoot up to that question. But I do remember being in the third grade, just really young in elementary school. And every Wednesday, I would ride the bus to my grandma's house, my mama and my papa's house. So every Wednesday, after a long, tedious day at school, the school bus would stop at the end of that long gravel driveway at the bottom of the hill. Those squeaky bus doors would open before me, and I'd take that last step into freedom after a long day. The life of an elementary schooler. And then I'd hear the bus doors close, and the bus continues on its route, waving between the hills and the trees, waving down the northern Kentucky back roads of the evening. And I'd stare up the hill at my grandma's house, where I could just barely see my grandma waiting for me, standing by her front door, sitting on her porch. And before I begin my trek up the hill, I'd look down at my old sneakers, and I'd see potholes and I'd see muddy puddles some days, but I'd always notice, every Wednesday, I'd notice that newspaper rolled up really tight, coated in that bright orange plastic. So I'd grab the newspaper from my grandma, and I'd bring it up the hill. I'd eventually arrive at her front porch, and I'd give her a hug and a kiss. And this was a good memory. A lot of good memories, Wednesdays in elementary school. I remember my grandma, she actually paid me. She paid me $1. $1 every Wednesday. That was my salary for bringing her the newspaper, just because she didn't want to have to walk to the end of the driveway and then back up the hill to the house. $1 a week. I wasn't in it for the money. So in third grade, I actually was in it for a different reason. I was in it for the comics. So I remember, after greeting my mama and stepping inside the door frame and slinging my backpack across the wall of her living room and plopping myself down on her sofa, I can actually almost hear her clanging around in the kitchen, just telling you this story, whipping up a snack for me after school. And I'd tear that sealant off the newspaper, and I'd start flipping through the pages. And I remember flipping past the car dealership ads, although they always had a great deal. I remember flipping past the local stories of the previous nights before, whether it be the high school football team or some sort of neighborhood crime in the area. And I'd find myself in the back pages of the newspaper, because that's where the comics were hidden. I remember some days it being the Garfield comics, and those were good. I like the Garfield comics. Other days, the Peanuts gang with Snoopy and Charlie Brown, classics. I see some smiles. But I remember in the 3rd grade, every Wednesday, I remember hoping for the Smurfs. I wanted to see a Smurfs comic. And I think part of the reason why the Smurfs comics were so appealing, so funny to me at this point of my life was because of the Smurfs' usage of the word Smurf. So some of you know what I'm talking about, and others maybe you don't. That's okay though, because I've brought some Smurf comics with me this morning. So here's one. Feel free to laugh at these. No way. We should Smurf on the bridge over the river Smurf. Come on. Everybody Smurf to work and get a Smurf on. We've got another here. This is the second. It's Papa Smurf. You're very nice, but I don't want you Smurfing the village anymore. And then he says, yes, Papa Smurf. Not sure what's going on there. And then here's another. Don't cry. I'll help you Smurf another Smurf that Smurfs under the water, and then we'll succeed. And then he says, oh, thanks, Handy Smurf. And then this is a little blurry, but this is actually a sad moment. The last Smurf comic of the day. Go to Smurf, Brainy. We'll Smurf what we like. Who do you Smurf you are? Go Smurf a kite. And then in the corner, I hate kites. So if you didn't see what I was talking about with the usage of the word Smurf before, hopefully you get the picture now. It's never very apparent what the word Smurf means in the Smurf village. Is it referencing a noun? Is it referencing an adjective, an adverb, a pronoun? Is it a word that carries a positive connotation, or maybe a more negative one? We really have no idea what the word Smurf means. And here's my transition, and I actually think that this is pretty smooth, so hear me out. My claim is that we, as Christians, as the body of believers, my claim is that we actually use the word worship in a very similar way. Do we really know what it means to worship? Do we really understand the value, the worth, the meaningfulness that word carries? Or is that just a term that we throw around? We like to use it on Sunday mornings. Worship is a theme that is threaded throughout both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And even as I say that word over and over again, there are a few passages that come to mind, but I think there's one, I believe, that can actually move us in the right direction in understanding a meaningful definition of this term, worship. It's actually just one verse. It comes from Paul's letter to the Romans chapter 12, verse 1. So here's what I've got. I'll go ahead and read the version that I've got, and if you've got a Bible or a Bible app in front of you, feel free to find it for yourself, because we're going to be in this one verse quite a bit throughout the next few minutes. Romans 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational act of worship. Okay, I'll read it one more time. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational act of worship. Okay, and that comes from the Amplified Bible translation. That's what I'm reading from this morning. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Paul writes this letter to both the Jewish people of Rome as well as the Gentile community, both of which would have known about the ancient sacrificial system. That may be a term that rings a bell for you. The sacrificial system is the complicated and eccentric system that we read about today, primarily in the Old Testament book of Leviticus. And if you were to go through Leviticus and grab a piece of paper and a pen and take notes, which you can take a breath, we don't have the time to do that this morning, but if you were, you'd notice 5 different kinds of sacrifices. 5 different offerings that are scattered throughout this sacrificial system of Leviticus. So first you have the burnt offering, which is one of the more common types of sacrifices. This was the literal burning of a bull, ram, or a bird. Second, you have the grain offering, typically completed through the burning of a prepared bread. Third, the peace offering. The peace offering didn't initially involve burning at all, but rather the slaughter of a pure cow, sheep, or a goat. Fourth, the sin offering, which this is actually a little unique. It was completed through the sacrifice of any of the elements that I've just previously listed. Some sort of combination, some sort of arrangement of those previous offerings, previous sacrifices. Some of you may be familiar with the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. It's actually a staple of the Old Testament, maybe a good study for another day. That's a perfect example of a sin offering in Leviticus. Okay? And then fifth and finally, the guilt offering. And that is a sacrifice that held a much more kind of monetary implication. So my point in saying this is that sacrifices mattered to ancient Jewish people. Sacrifices mattered to God, and decades later, in the 1st century in Rome, the sacrificial system was gone, but it was far from forgotten. This was an identifying element of who the Jewish people were. So if we want to understand this passage, if we want to understand this one verse and all of its worth, all of its value, and all of its meaningfulness, then we first have to understand this. So with all of that, the concept of a living sacrifice is kind of ironic, right? A living sacrifice. That's a striking image because in the context of the old sacrificial system that we've talked about, the point of a sacrifice in itself was ultimately for the animal to be killed, burned, or slaughtered, or for the grain to be destroyed in a flame as the smoke and the embers rise up into the air. Even Jesus himself actually died on the cross during his sacrifice before rising again 3 days later. It's important to remember with this, as we're talking about the context and even the authorship of Romans 12, Paul himself was a Jewish man, a faithful Jewish man, so he understood the captivating language that he was using when he wrote this. Each of the sacrifices that we've mentioned so far are extremely unique in the ways they were completed as well as the reasons they were necessary. But there's a common thread throughout each, including the sacrifice of Jesus as well as the Levitical sacrifices, that being the element of submission. Okay? Whether you're talking about a Jewish man in ancient Israel leading his healthiest bull to the altar in order to be slaughtered, for the blood to be shed, or if we're talking about Jesus himself hanging from the cross as he bows his bloody head and takes his final breath of air before dying, soon to rise again 3 days later, there's an inherent element of submission written into each, right? Worship is submission. John 6, verse 38, Jesus says, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me." These are the words of Jesus. Every breath that Jesus breathed was done in submission to the Father. Worship is submission. And Romans 12 suggests that this is holy and well-pleasing to God. Jesus knew it, and so did his ancient Jewish people. One quick side note that I feel a little compelled to add as I was preparing this sermon for the morning. I want you to notice, as we read Romans 12:1, notice that God sees our bodies as valuable in this passage. I want you to notice that God recognizes the goodness in your physical presence, so much so that you can actually please God by simply presenting it to him. This is good news for us. So I want you to hear me when I say that all of your wrinkles, all of the bags under your eyes, all of your acne, all of your scars, all of your curves, all of your cellulite, all of your stretch marks, and every part of your physical body that may keep you from loving yourself. God loves it. God created it. God wants it. And there is so much goodness in that. There's so much goodness in this. And that goes for every soul in this room. For this is your rational act of worship, Paul writes. So you could say by now that we've actually already answered our own question. Because what is worship? Worship is submission. Right? Worship is submission. And Romans suggests that this alone is good and pleasing to God, and I'd agree with that, but I'd also argue that this is a two-sided coin. And I think we're still missing the other side. I think that this alone is an incomplete answer. So we're going to do another quick survey. We're going to do a show of hands. I mentioned having the text in front of you just a few minutes ago. So if you have your Bible, if you have a Bible app, if you even have a church-provided Bible on one of the chairs in front of you, I'm gonna invite you to open that up and find Romans 12:1. And I just want you to read that passage to yourself, just really quickly. I'll give you a few moments. But as you're reading, I want you to focus in on the last word of that verse. What's the last word of Romans 12:1? I understand lots of us have different Bible translations, different versions of the text. I think there's some good dialogue that can come from that. So I'll give you just another moment. What's the last word in Romans 12:1 in the Bible that you're reading? Yeah, so who has worship? Almost everybody. That's what I expected. Does anyone have a different word? Thanks for the participation. Service. 3. Service. Yeah, did you guys have service as well? Yeah, so a little confusing, right? So we've got worship and service, two different words with two different meanings in the same text. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of that for just a few minutes. Some of you will really like that, and some of you it may be a little bit more of a difficult thing to sit through. But we're actually going to learn some Greek together this morning. So the Greek word for worship in the New Testament is proskuneo. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time, and then it'll be your turn. Okay, proskuneo. It's pretty good. So proskuneo is the term that Paul uses for worship in his letters throughout the New Testament. But here's the issue with that. Paul actually doesn't say this is your rational act of proskuneo. He actually says this is your rational act of laterion, which is a totally different word that actually better translates to service. It better translates to service. Okay, so let's revisit the text. We're going to go back to Romans 12:1, and I'm going to read from the Amplified Version again, And this time I'm going to substitute that last word. I'm going to substitute that term worship for service. So here we go. This is the new definition of Romans 12:1, now that we understand that last word of the verse. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational act of service. So maybe you're thinking like me, and this really shifts the way that we understand this passage. Because how could this verse help us understand how to worship when the term worship isn't even included in the actual text? A little misleading, right? And here's what I'd say to that. What if this isn't a passage telling us how to worship, but instead this is a passage telling us what worship is? Okay. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's actually really important. What if Romans 12:1 isn't a passage telling us how to worship, but instead a passage telling us what worship is? Worship is submission, but worship is also service, right? Sometime in the early 1st century in Europe, the act of bowing your head before a king or a queen or an emperor was implemented. And plenty of cultures across the world today, they still bow as a sign of respect, and maybe you've encountered this, maybe you've witnessed it firsthand, or maybe you've even seen it in a TV series or a movie, maybe on a TikTok, online. But I want us to recognize that there's actually a deep hidden symbolism within the bowing of the head. The original context of the bow was for a servant to present himself at the foot of royalty, dropping his head to the floor and in the process revealing the back of his neck, submitting to power, saying, "If you choose to take my life, you may do so now with just one slash of your sword. If you want to take my life, it's on the table. Because while my head and my eyes are down, my vulnerable neck is up." So, you want to present your body as a living sacrifice. That's great. That may be your best decision of the week, best decision of the month, best decision of the year. But if you want to do that, if we want to present ourselves as a living sacrifice, this is the posture that it requires. Posture of the submissive servant. You know, I've been in church for as long as I can remember. Literally, I don't remember a time where my dad wasn't pastoring a church and I wasn't waking up early and staying late on Sundays. And growing up, I thought that worship was the 3 songs that we sang before the sermon and then the 1 song that we sang to conclude the service all together before we went into Cincinnati and ate Skyline chili for lunch. And some of you know what Skyline is, and others of you are maybe not so blessed. But it's so much more than that, isn't it? We don't have to throw that word around like we're Smurfs, like we don't know the meaning, like we don't understand the weight, because it really does mean something. It meant something to the ancient Jewish people. It meant something to Jesus himself. It means something to the Father. And with all of that, I would suggest it should mean something to us. Worship is submission, and worship is service. but it's incomplete with one and without the other. I'm young. I am 21 years old. I haven't been doing this for a really long time, but I've been told that every good sermon, it includes an application. And I think looking around, I think most of you have heard Barry preach for long enough to understand that to be the truth. Here's the thing, though. I don't want to just tell you how to apply Romans 12:1. And part of the reason behind that is because I'm seeing a lot of faces who are actually wiser than me in this room. But I do want to partner with you, come alongside you, and explore the answers to this application together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to participate in a spiritual practice right now called Lectio Divina. Some of you may be familiar with this, and others maybe not. Lectio Divina is the term for divine reading. So I'm going to go ahead and invite you to stand, and I'll give you just a moment. Stand if you're able, stand if you're willing. I'm also going to suggest that you shut your eyes, so you can do that now, and just breathe. Focus on your inhaling and your exhaling for just a moment. I'm actually going to hold my hands out in a receiving form. Feel free to join me in that if you choose. And here's what's about to happen. I'm going to read our passage again. And our job is pretty simple. Our job is to give the Spirit space, both in this room and in our bodies, minds, hearts, and soul to work. We're going to give the Spirit space to speak. There's going to be quite a few moments of silence in the next few minutes, and that will be uncomfortable for some of us, me included. But I'm going to invite you to just sit in that tension together. Okay. Listen to the words I am speaking and notice the presence of God, and I'll pray as we conclude. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational act of service. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational act of service. God, how can we better submit to you? Are you asking me to submit my demanding work schedule to spend more time with my family? Are you asking me to submit my politics so that I can love people deeply? Are you asking me to submit the plans that I've had in place for such a long time now and follow a different path that you lead me down? God, how can we better serve you? We know that we serve you by serving others. So are you asking me to serve my spouse just to make their week a little easier on them? Are you asking me to serve the underprivileged people in my own community struggling with things that I take for granted literally every day, God? Are you asking me to serve financially and give up just a portion of the worldly blessing that you've given me to a group that simply needs it more, God? God, as we stand together as one people before you in the silence, with arms stretched out, with eyes closed, with thoughtful minds, and with open hearts, God, we ask you in this space and in this specific moment to transform us. Create willing hearts, create willing souls in this room to become a living sacrifice in our physical bodies for you, God. And we know that that only happens through our submission and our service to you. We know that in itself is worship, and for that we're thankful. God, I know that this people in this community has a special place in your heart and a special place in your eyes. Lord, I'm just asking for your Spirit to work, not just in this moment, but throughout the week and throughout the months, throughout the years, throughout lives, and throughout generations, God. And we know that that is work that is only possible through you. We know that you are worthy of it all. God, we know that you are worthy of our submission as well as our service, but we also know that you request it both. God, we're thankful. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, we say, amen.